Jackson and Olivia had always dreamed of a wedding that reflected their love for nature, freedom, and the home they were building together. When they purchased a picturesque 5-acre property in Pinecrest Hollow, they knew they had found the perfect place to begin their future. Surrounded by towering pines, open meadows, and a tranquil creek winding through the landscape, their land was more than just a plot. It was a sanctuary, untouched by the rigid constraints of suburban oversight. As they walked through their property hand in hand, they imagined fairy lights strung between the trees, a rustic wooden arch where they would exchange vows, and their closest friends and family gathered to celebrate their union. They had deliberately chosen to settle just outside the boundaries of the local homeowners association, hoping to avoid the bureaucratic meddling that often came with such organizations. Little did they know, their dream wedding would become the epicenter of a battle far larger than they had ever anticipated. Despite their land being outside the HOA's jurisdiction, their plans caught the attention of Eleanor Winthrop, the self-proclaimed queen of the Pinecrest Hollow Homeowners Association. Eleanor had spent years molding the HOA into an extension of her will, wielding power over the community with an iron fist. From dictating the exact shade of beige allowed on home exteriors to mandating specific lawn heights, she thrived on micromanaging every aspect of her neighbors' lives. When she learned about Jackson and Olivia's grand wedding plans, she saw it as an affront to her authority, an event taking place on land she couldn't control, a challenge to the order she had established. Convinced that their wedding would set a dangerous precedent for nonconformity, Eleanor immediately sought ways to assert dominance. She sent a formal letter to the couple, claiming that their wedding plans violated community guidelines regarding large gatherings, noise levels, and property modifications. At first, Jackson and Olivia dismissed the letter as a simple misunderstanding, confident that Eleanor had no legal standing to interfere. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that she wasn't going to back down so easily. Soon as Jackson and Olivia refused to comply with Eleanor's unfounded demands, a barrage of official-looking violation notices began arriving in their mailbox. One claimed that the couple was conducting unauthorized construction on their property, citing the setup of temporary wedding structures as illegal modifications. Another alleged that the anticipated number of guests exceeded the maximum allowed gathering size, despite there being no such regulation applicable to their land. Some of the violations were outright absurd. One notice accused them of disrupting the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood with their wedding decor, while another claimed that parking arrangements for guests would create an environmental hazard. What started as an inconvenience quickly escalated into a legal nightmare when Eleanor threatened hefty fines and potential lawsuits. Jackson, a man known for his calm demeanor, found himself growing increasingly frustrated. Olivia, initially optimistic that reason would prevail, began to realize they were dealing with someone who thrived on control rather than fairness. They knew they needed professional legal help to put an end to Eleanor's harassment before it ruined the happiest day of their lives. Determined to fight back, Jackson contacted Marcus Reynolds, a seasoned real estate attorney with a reputation for dismantling overreaching HOA claims. After reviewing the case, Marcus wasted no time reassuring them that the HOA had no legal authority over their land. However, that didn't stop Eleanor from doubling down on her efforts. As Jackson and Olivia prepared their legal response, the harassment escalated, letters turned into threats, and warnings turned into outright intimidation. Eleanor began involving other members of the HOA board, spreading rumors that Jackson and Olivia were defying community standards and setting a dangerous example for other residents. She even went so far as to enlist a few local officials, pulling strings to have inspections conducted on the property under the guise of enforcing county regulations. Each attempt to derail their wedding plans was met with swift rebuttal from Marcus, who filed official responses rejecting every bogus claim. But Eleanor was not one to accept defeat gracefully. When legal methods failed to intimidate the couple, she resorted to deception, forging documents and fabricating violations in an attempt to create the illusion of wrongdoing. As the legal skirmish raged on, Jackson delved deeper into the ownership records of his property, searching for any leverage he could use against Eleanor's relentless campaign. What he discovered was nothing short of astonishing. His deed included the mineral rights beneath the land, a detail he had overlooked when finalizing the purchase. Not only did this mean he had exclusive access to any valuable resources beneath his property, but the mineral rights extended beyond his immediate land, reaching beneath portions of the HOA-controlled subdivision itself. The realization struck him like lightning. Eleanor and the HOA may have been trying to exert control over him, but in reality, he held power over them. If he chose to, he could lease or develop those mineral rights, potentially disrupting the very community Eleanor fought so hard to control. The irony was almost poetic. Armed with this newfound advantage, Jackson and Marcus devised a plan, not just to stop the wedding harassment, but to turn the tables on Eleanor and expose the overreach of the HOA once and for all. Realizing that Jackson and Olivia were not backing down, Eleanor escalated her campaign of harassment to new heights. She began filing false reports with local authorities, claiming that Jackson's property had been the site of numerous code violations, noise disturbances, and even illegal construction. One particularly bold move was her fabricated claim of a utility easement running through their land, a blatant attempt to create legal hurdles that would delay or outright prevent the wedding from taking place. The absurdity of her tactics became increasingly clear to those following the dispute, but Eleanor had no intention of stopping. In a final, desperate act of authority, she filed for a temporary restraining order against Jackson, citing fabricated concerns about public safety and environmental damage. The restraining order, though clearly based on false premises, was granted temporarily, barring Jackson from hosting any large events on his own property. The timing was devastating. The order came just days before the wedding, leaving the couple scrambling to find a way forward. Furious but not defeated, Jackson vowed that the wedding would proceed, one way or another. Meanwhile, Marcus and his legal team worked around the clock to challenge the restraining order, uncovering discrepancies in Eleanor's filings that could potentially turn the tide in their effort. Despite the mounting legal pressure, Jackson and Olivia refused to let Eleanor ruin their special day. They moved forward with their wedding preparations, hoping that Marcus's legal challenge would succeed in time. Friends and family arrived early to help set up the ceremony, determined to stand by the couple no matter what. However, just as guests began taking their seats, the unthinkable happened. Several police cars rolled onto the property, sirens blaring. Officers exited their vehicles with serious expressions, holding documents declaring that the wedding was in violation of the restraining order. The guests, initially confused, quickly realized the severity of the situation as Jackson stepped forward to confront the officers. Eleanor had gone to the extreme. She had convinced the authorities that the wedding was an illegal gathering and had ensured that Jackson himself would face consequences for defying her fabricated order. To the shock of everyone present, Jackson was handcuffed and escorted away in front of his friends, family, and a stunned Olivia. The chaos that followed was unlike anything the quiet community had ever seen. Guests erupted in protest, shouting at the officers and demanding justice. The entire event was recorded by multiple attendees, and within hours, footage of Jackson's arrest was circulating on social media, igniting a firestorm of outrage as the videos of Jackson's wrongful arrest spread online. The reaction was swift and intense. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as an outrageous example of HOA overreach and abuse of power. Legal experts weighed in, condemning the blatant misuse of authority and calling for immediate action. Social media exploded with hashtags like #FreeJackson and #HOA Reform, with thousands of people sharing their own horror stories of HOAs gone too far. The tipping point came when Jackson, after being released on bail, held a press conference to expose the full extent of Eleanor's campaign against him. He presented the evidence that Marcus had uncovered, documents proving the restraining order had been fraudulently obtained, along with a detailed explanation of how Eleanor had knowingly exceeded her authority. But the most shocking revelation came when Jackson revealed his ownership of the mineral rights beneath the HOA-controlled subdivision. The media latched onto this revelation, spinning it into a narrative of poetic justice. The very land Eleanor sought to control was, in reality, at Jackson's mercy. The public, once divided on HOA regulations, overwhelmingly rallied behind Jackson, demanding accountability for Eleanor and the entire HOA board. As more residents came forward with their own experiences of Eleanor's overreach, it became evident that Jackson and Olivia were not the only victims. Longtime homeowners shared stories of unjust fines, intimidation tactics, and arbitrary rule enforcement. A retired veteran recounted how he had been fined for flying an American flag on his property, while a young couple explained how Eleanor had delayed their home renovation project for months over meaningless technicalities. The community, once fearful of speaking out, found strength in numbers. A petition was launched calling for Eleanor's removal as HOA president, quickly amassing hundreds of signatures. Meanwhile, Jackson took his fight beyond just his own wedding. He announced that he would pursue legal action to challenge the HOA's authority and seek justice for everyone who had been wronged. Inspired by his courage, neighbors banded together, forming a coalition dedicated to exposing corruption within the HOA. With public sentiment overwhelmingly in his favor, Jackson realized that this battle was no longer just about his wedding. It was about restoring fairness and justice for the entire community. The legal case against Eleanor and the HOA gained traction faster than anyone had expected. Marcus and his team compiled a damning case, revealing not only the fraudulent restraining order but also a pattern of illegal activities spanning years. Documents surfaced proving that Eleanor had falsified reports, manipulated HOA funds, and even engaged in backdoor deals with local officials to maintain her grip on power. As the case gained media attention, state regulators and legal authorities took notice, launching a formal investigation into the HOA's practices. The final blow came when a judge ruled in Jackson's favor, not only dismissing all charges against him but also invalidating the restraining order and ruling that the HOA had engaged in unlawful harassment. Eleanor, once the untouchable ruler of Pinecrest Hollow, was removed from her position in disgrace. The HOA itself faced dissolution as legal experts determined that its practices had violated multiple state and federal laws. In the end, Jackson and Olivia had won, not just for themselves, but for an entire community that had suffered under Eleanor's reign. As they stood in their backyard, reflecting on the battle they had fought, they knew their struggle had led to something far greater than just a wedding. It had sparked a movement for change. With the HOA officially dissolved and Eleanor disgraced, Jackson turned his attention to the people who had suffered under her rule. It wasn't enough for him to simply celebrate his personal victory. He wanted to make sure justice extended to everyone Eleanor had wronged. As Marcus and his legal team reviewed the HOA's financial records, they discovered that Eleanor had misappropriated thousands of dollars in unjust fines and fraudulent fees. Homeowners who had been bullied into paying arbitrary penalties were finally given the chance to reclaim what had been taken from them. However, Jackson didn't just rely on the courts to ensure restitution. With the mineral rights now in his control, he negotiated a lucrative deal to lease drilling rights to a major energy company, securing a steady stream of income. Instead of keeping the profits solely for himself, he announced that a significant portion of those funds would go toward reimbursing the residents who had been unfairly targeted by the HOA. One by one, families who had been financially drained by Eleanor's greed received checks that restored their savings and peace of mind. The gesture didn't just heal wounds, it solidified Jackson's role as a leader and protector of his community. The fall of the HOA marked a turning point for Pinecrest Hollow. For years, the neighborhood had been divided between those who lived in fear of Eleanor's scrutiny and those who dared to challenge her authority. Now, with her reign over, the community faced the challenge of rebuilding trust and unity. Jackson, understanding the importance of moving forward together, proposed a plan that would not only help heal past wounds but also create something meaningful for the future. Using a portion of his newly acquired funds, he purchased the former HOA clubhouse, a building that had once served as the headquarters for Eleanor's rule, and transformed it into a space for legal aid services and community events. The clubhouse, once a symbol of control and oppression, was now a beacon of support and justice. Residents who had been forced into silence now had a place where they could seek legal advice, organize neighborhood initiatives, and rebuild the sense of belonging that had been lost under Eleanor's leadership. What had once been a battleground for power had become a center for positive change, reminding everyone that their neighborhood was not defined by rules and restrictions, but by the people who lived there. As Jackson's battle with the HOA gained statewide attention, lawmakers and homeowner advocacy groups began pushing for reform. Across the state, other communities shared similar stories of unchecked HOA power, corrupt leadership, and homeowners who had been left with little recourse against unfair treatment. Inspired by Jackson's fight, a group of state legislators introduced a new bill aimed at limiting HOA authority and providing stronger protections for homeowners. Dubbed the Jackson Act, the legislation proposed new restrictions on HOAs, ensuring that no governing body could arbitrarily fine residents, fabricate violations, or interfere with private property rights without clear legal grounds. The bill gained overwhelming support from the public, and within months, it was signed into law. Jackson had never imagined that his personal struggle would lead to such widespread change, but as he stood on the steps of the state capitol, watching the governor sign the bill, he knew that the fight had been worth it. No homeowner in the state would ever have to endure what he and Olivia had gone through, and that was a victory greater than any courtroom ruling. Year after their wedding was nearly destroyed, Jackson and Olivia found themselves standing in the same spot where they had planned to exchange vows. This time, however, there were no threats, no legal battles, and no looming presence of an overreaching HOA. Instead, they were surrounded by friends, family, and a community that had grown stronger through adversity. They celebrated their first anniversary with a massive gathering, one that symbolized not only their love for each other but also the triumph of their neighborhood over oppression. As they danced under the string lights they had once feared would be deemed a violation, they reflected on everything they had been through. Their fight had been difficult, exhausting, and at times overwhelming, but it had also been transformative. What started as a simple wedding dispute had turned into a movement for justice, a victory for an entire community, and a personal journey that proved they could withstand anything together. With Olivia in his arms and the people who had stood by their side cheering them on, Jackson knew that no power-hungry bureaucrat could ever take away what truly mattered. As Jackson and Olivia celebrated their victory, Eleanor Winthrop was facing the bitter consequences of her own actions. Once the self-proclaimed ruler of Pinecrest Hollow, she now found herself completely stripped of the power she had so desperately clung to. With the dissolution of the HOA, she lost her influence, her reputation, and even her ability to control the community she had ruled with an iron fist. But the final, most ironic twist came when she realized that Jackson's mineral rights extended beneath her own property. The very man she had tried to destroy now had legal authority over the land she lived on. And while Jackson had no intention of using his rights to cause her harm, the knowledge that she was powerless against him was a fitting end to her reign. In the months that followed, Eleanor disappeared from public view, her name becoming little more than a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. The community she had once terrorized flourished in her absence, proving that true leadership comes not from control, but from compassion, fairness, and a willingness to stand up for what is right.